Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Today we have our teacher, Pamela Weiss, and Pamela has practiced the Zen and Theravada traditions of Buddhism for over 30 years. She is trained in both the Zen and Theravada traditions, including several years of Zen monastic training and teacher training at Jack Cornfield at Spirit Rock. Pamela leads a Wednesday evening sitting group at SF Insight and teaches classes, workshops, and retreats internationally. She's also an executive coach and the founder of Appropriate Response, a company dedicated to bringing the principles and practices of Buddhism into the workspace. And so I will welcome you to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. You can unmute and take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. It must have been a while since I've been here because some of what you said is no longer true. So I'm no longer leading a Wednesday evening group at San Francisco Insight, which has kind of consolidated, as many groups have through the pandemic. But I do teach at SFI on some Sunday nights. And I am no longer running Appropriate Response, which is the name of my old business. But I do, probably since the last time I was here, I had a book that was published called A Bigger Sky, Awakening a Fierce Feminine Buddhism. And I'm now working on a novel. So just a little bit of updates because things keep changing. Yeah. And I wanted to talk today about this thing that we are in the midst of called the holidays. And I was thinking a good title for a talk might be something like How to Survive the Holidays. And for some people, this stretch of time is really lovely. And we put up lights and it becomes very social, and it's time for friends and family and exchanging gifts and so on. But there's also a way in which I think for many people, this particular stretch of time is actually quite difficult. And in particular, it can be difficult because of someone described to me recently what they called kind of like an enforced or obligatory joy that we're supposed to feel during this time. And so whatever lack of that, whatever loneliness or sadness or regret or disappointment, any of those things that we feel, it kind of doubles down, because the bar's been raised and we're supposed to be having a good time. So if there are those of you who love this stretch of time and are having a wonderful time, no problem. Please and do enjoy. And for those who find it difficult or are mixed, also please know that you're definitely not alone. I was thinking about the phrase, the word holidays, and wondering what it might be like for us if we reclaimed the word itself, which, if you break it apart, is holy days. And we forget this, particularly in a American capitalist culture where something that could be pointing us to holiness, which I'll describe a little bit more in a few moments, is kind of reduced to, I don't know about you, but man, I'm getting so many catalogs in my mailbox every day. It gets kind of reduced to buy. And I grew up Jewish, so for me, the thing of needing to buy and wrap and do gifts is not so big of a thing, but I know a lot of people who are really stressed out about needing to buy stuff and buy the right stuff and give the right stuff and so on. So what happens for us if in the spirit of spiritual life, in the spirit of spiritual practice, we reclaim this period of time, which, you know, if we look at the cycles of the planet, the cycles of the earth, rather than the cycles of the Western calendar, we are approaching winter solstice. We're approaching this place in our direct experience of our days and nights of increasing darkness, of an invitation really to slow down, to pause, reflect, consider, to take this time for connecting rather than just to parties and buying and gifting, but to connect to this idea of holiness. And I looked it up, you know, holy, which means many things, many definitions, divine, sacred, venerated. And interestingly, in the Buddhist tradition, it's described that when one enters the path of practice, that it is called entering the holy life. And this is true whether one becomes a pure renunciate, becomes a monk or a nun, or one just places spiritual life and practice at the center. Remembering, many of you know, the word mindfulness, sati, is often translated as to remember. And so there's this invitation to remember something that is both vast and mysterious and, I don't know, bigger than we are, to look beyond ourselves. That's one side. And the other is to really remember to see the extraordinary beauty in what we call the mundane, in the simple things in our lives, to appreciate so much that we often take for granted or overlook. And to do that is not so much about getting more or getting better experiences as it is about the quality of attention that we bring to what's already here. So for me, giving a Dharma talk is sometimes just an excuse to read poetry. So I thought I would share with you a couple of poems that really point to these two dimensions, these two, in some ways, kind of seemingly paradoxical aspects of what I'm calling holy or holiness, the vast, mysterious side and the seeing the beauty in the mundane. So here's the first poem. This is from E. Cummings. This is one of my favorite poems ever. He says, I thank you, God, for most this amazing day. for the leaping greenly spirits of trees and the true, blue, true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today, and this is the sun's birthday. This is the birth day of life and love and wings, and of the gay, great, happening, illimitable earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, any, lifted from the no of all nothing, human, merely being, doubt, unimaginable you? Now the ears of my ears are awake, and the eyes of my eyes are open. So he's pointing us towards something bigger, vaster, beyond our normal imagination. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, any, lifted from the no of all nothing, human, merely being, doubt, unimaginable you? So part of the practice of turning toward holiness is remembering to look beyond our familiar, to look beyond the kind of boxes that we place ourselves in, the habit body, as it's sometimes described, and to really, as the poem describes, it's an invitation to open our eyes, to open our ears, to see the vastness and mystery of what's always and already here. In some traditions, this is called God. And in the Buddhist tradition, I think we would call it reality, or things as they are, or as the Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi used to call it, things as it is. The very fabric of the world we inhabit, seeing the extraordinary mystery of that. So that's one side of the invitation, to step into the holidays as holy days. And the other is to meet the seemingly mundane, those simple things in our lives, with eyes of appreciation, of, as I said before, sort of not taking for granted. So I'll read a second poem. This one's a little longer, so you can kind of invite you to sit back and relax, and as you hear it, and just like let the images of the poem wash through you, and notice as you hear what gets touched, what gets stirred in you. So this is pointing to the beauty of the mundane things in the world. It's called At the Corner Store, and it's by Alison Luderman. She says, "It was a new old man behind the counter, skinny, brown, and eager. He greeted me like his long-lost daughter, as if we both came from the same world, someplace warmer and more gracious than this cold city. I was thirsty and alone, sick at heart, grief-soiled, and his face lit up as if I were his prodigal daughter returning, coming back to the freezer bins in front of the register, which were still and always filled with the same old cable car ice cream sandwiches and cheap frozen greens. Back to the knobs of beef and packages of hot dogs, the familiar shelves strung with potato chips and corn chips, stacked up beer boxes, and a mortal Jim Beam. I lumbered up to the case and bought my precious bottled water. And he returned my change, beaming, as if I were the bright new buds on the just bursting open cherry trees, as if I were everything beautiful struggling to grow. And he was blessing me as he handed me my dime. Over the dirty counter and the plastic tub of red licorice whips, this old man who didn't speak English beamed out love to me in the iron week after my mother's death. So that when I emerged from his store, my whole cockeyed life glowed gold like a sunset after rain. Frustrated city dogs were yelping in their yards, mad with passion behind chain-link fences, and a woman in the driveway of a peeling paint house. A woman and a little girl danced to contagious reggae. Praise Allah, Yah, the Buddha, Kuan Yin, Jesus, Mary, and even jealous old Jehovah for hands and eyes of the divine everywhere. As if I were the bright new buds of the just bursting open cherry trees, as if I were everything beautiful struggling to grow, and he was blessing me as he handed me my dime. So this in some way is the other side of the other dimension or aspect of what I'm pointing to as holy or holiness, which is not so much about opening ourselves to the vastness, to the mystery, but is about meeting each particular, feeling the collecting of our change as a blessing, taking our ability to meet each person as if they were a prodigal child coming home. It's a beautiful invitation for us to consider as we traverse this stretch of time. So how do we do this? How do we transform our perspective, our heart, our actions into behavior and words and speech and engagement that feels holy in this way? Now borrow a line from the Buddha. Some of you may know. It said that when the Buddha was on his deathbed, the very last thing he said to his followers was something like, everything falls apart. Everything is impermanent. So he reminds us to begin that there's no place to hold on. And he pairs that with everything falls apart, and the term that's used is appamada, which is often translated as something like practice diligently or strive to accomplish the path. So because of the nature of impermanence, because everything is changing, because the world of things is unreliable, we practice. We bring our wholehearted effort to meeting what's here. And in some ways, the translation of this second part of it, the appamada, can feel kind of hard, like push or effort or strive or do. And there may be an element of that is useful because our habits, our habits cut deep, and as I described, even this holiday period can get turned into just, a mass buy more stuff event. But there's another translation of the term that comes from the translator and author Stephen Batchelor that I find very inspiring. And he says, instead of practice diligently, that this same term, appamada, can be understood to read something like tread or walk the path with care. And this, I think, points us to the how we stay awake in our lives. We stay awake both to the vastness of the mystery and also awake to the particulars of this email, this phone call, this person in front of me now. And this description of treading the path with care brings in this kind of quality of heartfulness, right? Because care here it's not care as in careful, like be careful. It's care as in full of care. How we might meet each moment with tenderness. Remembering that it's fleeting, remembering that it's here and gone. It's kind of like nothing lasts. Love everything anyway. And it's interesting that in some descriptions, as is kind of common in the Buddhist context, is that what's meant by this appamada, practice diligently or tread the path with care, is best described in the negative, which is often the case in Buddhism. It's really, for me, that's at the heart of the whole practice, that we come in thinking we're going to get something. And actually what happens is everything gets stripped away. And then what we're left with is something tender and pristine, something really beautiful. When the layers of habit, when the layers of kind of perfunctory speaking and seeing and doing soften, we're left with something so precious, not precious in a way that is like her precious bottle of bottled water, right? Preciousness not because it's unusual, but because it's the simplest thing, seen, felt, held with eyes of love. So in many ways, this term appamada can be described as the absence of negligence, the absence of indifference, the absence of nonchalance or heartlessness or carelessness. So I and you and we can all consider, what would it be like to move through the world with non-negligence, with non-carelessness, with non-indifference? It would be a different world. So I want to say a few things that I think are more practical. Some of my suggestions that I take myself and offer to you as more tactical ways to engage this next stretch of time through the holidays and the turn of the year. So again, in the spirit of this, the darkness that comes at this time of solstice, that if we follow the natural rhythms of the body, the heart, the mind that are expressed in the darkening days that we are approaching, that we're really invited to pause and spend some time being quiet, going inward, just as we do in a period of meditation. And sometimes what's needed to do that first is just to create some space. And that creating space is not a doing, just like I was saying about, walking the path with care is about non-indifference, non-carelessness. Creating space is about non-doing. It's not about it's not about doing something else. It's about stopping, right? So what would it be like if you gave yourself a day, a few days, an hour to unplug, to turn off, to be still? And in that space in which we unhook from the kind of constant barrage of news and social media and social interaction and so on, that we use that space to reflect, to take some time as this turn of the year happens, to look back and consider. 2021 was such a hard year for so many people. Not just the pandemic, but all of what the relentlessness of the pandemic revealed is the ongoing kind of rift of divisiveness and racism and climate change. Someone said earlier at the beginning of the call today, we're expecting an atmospheric river of rain today in California, in the Bay Area. I talked to a friend earlier this morning who said it was over 60 degrees in Massachusetts. So we have this climate event that is upon us, and we're not waiting for it to happen anymore. It's already here. And we have this assault, on truth, democracy, women's rights. It's intense what's happening. Feels like we're the the frog in the pot, and the temperature keeps getting turned up. And so can we unplug for a little bit and give ourselves the gift of this space to feel what's here and to reflect back on how was it? Our tendency when we look back is to notice everything that was wrong. So I always encourage people when we do this kind of, reflecting back, to make sure that you pay special attention to what was good, what went well, what went right. And for those places where there is a sense of regret or disappointment, wishing that we had done something differently or better, more skillfully perhaps, then we practice forgiveness. Forgiveness, some of you may know, is the sort of the the tilling of the soil that is a practice often overlooked before practicing what are called in Buddhism the Brahma-viharas, these boundless qualities of the heart, of loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity. There's a lot of emphasis on the cultivation of these qualities of heart in the tradition. But what often isn't mentioned is that forgiveness is sort of the door that we have to walk through in order to cultivate this boundless heart. And there may be people in your lives who you feel prepared to forgive, but mostly in this way, I'm speaking about forgiveness for yourself. Forgiveness for the many ways you may not have met your own expectations or wished things had gone differently. So one side is practicing forgiveness and the other is maybe even harder. And that is really allowing yourself to celebrate, to appreciate, to enjoy even mundane things, even small things that were good, were wholesome, that were happy making. I mentioned before that I'm in the process of trying to write a novel. And man, it's hard, humbling practice. And I watched as I was coming sort of to the end of a series of classes that I was taking, and was asked to reflect back on, how's it gone and where are you now? And all that I could see was how much I hadn't gotten done. I only have this many words and I have so much left to do. That was the thing that I saw at first. That was the going to the negative. And then I had to stop myself really and instead turn to say, look what I did do, right? It's so easy to overlook that and jump to what's wrong. So I offer that just as an example for you to consider in whatever you may want to, or you may look back and reflect on. It's a funny thing, New Year's, the turn of the year is completely made up. It doesn't actually have anything to do with the moon and the sun and the planet and the stars in the sky. It's just an arbitrary date. But we can infuse that event that we call the turn of the year with meaning, with a kind of holiness, if I may say. If we engage it in this way, if we use it as an opportunity to both look back, to reflect, but also to look forward. And that's the last piece that I would speak to a little bit, that this is an opportunity to both look back, but also in that space, in that pause, in that reflection, to really consider for yourself not so much what do I want to do going forward, which is more of the typical New Year's resolution, here's what I'm going to do, or here's what I'm going to stop doing, but more in the spirit of aspiration, which is, I think, a question more like, who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? What would it mean to hand the people in my life dimes as if I were blessing them? How might I touch the various aspects of my life with this quality of love, with this quality of care? And it's a hard thing sometimes for us to allow ourselves to stretch into an aspiration. That's my doorbell. I'm going to have to answer. Hang on. You get the doorbell and the dog. Oh, yeah. So I was saying about using this made up line that we crossed from 2021 to 2022 to consider an intention. Again, different than a New Year's resolution. What is it that I always think of it from this poem from Ryokan, who says, Buddha is your mind and the way goes nowhere. Don't search for anything but this. This is kind of that grand mystery side that I was talking about of holiness. Buddha is your mind and the way goes nowhere. Don't search for anything but this. It's already here, all of it. And then he says, if you point your cart north when you want to go south, how will you arrive? So on one hand, again, in this kind of paradox of holiness, everything we need is already here. Who we are is already enough. And there is this, for me, intention setting is along the lines of pointing my cart, right? Clarifying for myself, not so much what I want to do, but what direction do I want to turn? Kind of like that. And it doesn't have to be something that's written in stone. It can be a living intention, a living aspiration that unfolds as we cross from 2021 to 2022 and enter into the next stretch of time. So maybe I will pause there and see if there are comments, questions, reflections. Anyone who'd like to say or ask is welcome.
Tom's got his hand up. Go ahead, Tom.
Should I speak from here?
Yeah, just use your outside voice.
Okay.
Are you in the room?
Okay. I really appreciate you reminding us that the mundane and really just these things that are holy and special, but they've just been watered down by over-experience. And I know there are exercises or, there are experiences or maybe even substances that, reawaken our senses to the specialness of each thing. Like eating a raisin mindfully, right, and really focusing on it. What other exercises or practices do you have? Are your favorites for bringing us back to that realization?
Yeah, it's such a good question. There's a kind of, in order to do what you're asking about and what I was pointing to, I think there are two components of it. The first is like I was talking about in Buddhist language, there's also often a way in which things are described in the negative or in the absence of. And so I think the first part is often about, how would I say, like unpeeling away whatever the familiar is. And for many of us, that has to do with labeling. So we see a tree and we say tree, and then we don't see the tree. We just see the word, right? So the first thing, you could do this with a person, perhaps someone you think you know very well, and you see that you think you know them, and you remind yourself that you don't. And in that peeling away of what you're calling the familiar, then we have an opportunity to say, what's here? What's fresh? What's a surprise? And that you don't have to actually look for it. It's more that in the peeling away of the habitual and the familiar, something fresh does arise. So I have two things that came to mind. One is my, I don't know if I recommend this to everyone, but I have a friend who used to do this little practice with his daughter. And about once a year, he would have them sit together and say, okay, now look at me and see that I'm not your father. And I'm going to look at you and see that you're not my daughter. And when she was little, she could do it for about 3 seconds, It was too weird. But it's in that spirit to see that the label that we place on someone, especially someone that we know deeply and well, that when we peel that away, something else can come through. And for me, it's the main practice that I do in this way has to do with walking in nature. So I have this little dog who you heard barking, and he is an opportunity for me to have to get out of my house and, take him for walks. So I live near Golden Gate Park, and I spend a lot of time now, more time walking than I do in meditation sitting. And so part of what I do is look around at trees, sky, grass, and see how easy it is to label and just think I already know what's there, and just to notice that and then allow something fresh to come through. So again, it's a practice that's more an undoing than a doing. And those are a couple of examples, but I would encourage you to experiment yourself and see what supports that kind of, like E. Cummings says, like sort of, now the eyes of my eyes are open, like that. This seeing what we don't usually see. Yeah, it's a great question. I have one more thing to say about that, which is that in the tradition of meditative practice, one of the main ways that we do what you're asking about is, I think it's Pema Chodron describes it as, we drop beneath the story. And what that can mean for us is to notice the mental, verbal, cognitive description of something. And I think of it as to drop under that, to drop from here's my thought about something to what do I feel? And then to drop further from what do I feel into how do I experience this in my body? And for me, that's one of the best ways to shift my orientation. Because the mind, maybe not yours, but mine, it kind of likes to just label everything and put it in its little box so that it can have it and have a sense of order and stability. But when I do this undoing of that, one of the ways that I do that is to invite myself to meet an experience, not so much from a cognitive or verbal place, but what's the felt sense in the heart? What's the visceral sense or experience of what's happening in my body? To drop down in that way can also often open a very different kind of experience with even something familiar and mundane. Yeah, so I'll stop there, but thank you for the question.
Those in the room, Bob Lair wrote, I won't try to summarize all that I heard and felt during your beautiful talk, but I felt a piece of humor I saw earlier this week. Somehow, and the person sitting at an exam table in the doctor's office hears his doctor saying, as I remove this mole, remember that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Cartoon titled Dermatologist.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I think, a way to a different angle to say, to invite us into what we might call the direct experience of our experience, which is, if someone's cutting a mole from your body, there will be physical pain, but the pain is inevitable, suffering is optional, if that's the version of it, is that we don't pile on, right? We don't add a whole story about what it means and therefore this is who I've become, or any of that. We keep it very simple and direct in our experience. Yeah. Looks like we have another hand.
All right, Clint, can you unmute?
Yes. I'm just curious, Pamela, can you tell us about this novel you're writing? The thread, I'm guessing it has some kind of Buddhist undertones to it, but
yes, it does. Yeah.
What plot you're creating, what characters?
Well, they say you're not supposed to talk about your novel when you're writing, but I'll give you a broad brush, which
I've never heard that one before. Okay.
That's what people have said to me. Don't talk about it too much. So I wrote a first book, which was a combination of memoir and Buddhist teaching and social commentary. And the social commentary part of it was really about bringing forward voices of women in the tradition who were largely written out, right? So there is, in the Pali Canon, very, very little of women's voices. And yet we know, because there's this collection of poems, that there was a whole community of women who woke up, just as there's a collection of poems of the nuns and of the monks. But where did all those voices go? Where did all those stories go? Where did their perspective go? So when I wrote the first book, I discovered the absence of those voices. And I ended up writing a chapter in which I told the story of the life of the Buddha through the eyes of his mother and his aunt who raised him and his wife. And I had to do it as fiction because there was so little that I could draw on. And it inspired something in me. So now in the broadest sense, the new book that I'm working on is all fiction. And it's really looking at the tradition in northern India, Nepal, 2,600 years ago, from the perspective of a variety of communities of women at that time, with the wish to help kind of rebalance the tilt in what I would describe as kind of the masculine feminine, which I mean as not as gender, but as energies, that shows up, how that shows up in our teachings, right? And you could hear it, what I'm speaking of, in the translation, the initial translation of Appamada as practice diligently, which has a certain tone to it. And then this alternate translation that comes in that says, tread the path with care. That's a very different flavor. And I feel like there's room for more of that. So that's a long-winded answer. I don't know if that answers what you're asking, Clint, but
I'll wait till I can go out and buy it in a bookstore.
It may be a while. It's very slow, but really, it's been really rich, to say that. So thank you anyway for asking. Yeah.
Sure.
Well, this is Grisha. I just wanted to thank you for your talk. And I could not find the poem that you mentioned, The Corner Store. I really appreciate these little microdoses that I can carry with me every day, like the dime. And I love that dime. I love what you just said. This quoted the thing about turning the cart. I have such a negative bias. That's the thing I'm fighting the most. And so I like this idea of these little things you can drop in the day to change the attitude and change the negative bias. my sister and I, when we talk, we'll say, "Oh my God, is anything okay?"
Yes.
A real challenge to just stop at any and count gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if you listen to the news, right? It doesn't feel like anything is okay. But if you pay attention to your moment-to-moment experience in your life, there are many things that are okay. The simple things that are actually spectacular in their own way.
Okay,
so I think we're at time. Is that true, Grisha?
Yes, we are. All right. So at this point, thank you. Thank you so much, Pamela. Let's see, do we have any announcements? Yes.
I'm the host today, so please stay and enjoy the fellowship of the Sangha. We have hot water for tea and some sweet treats. You can leave your cup in the sink and I'll take care of it if you have tea. I'll be going around with the Donna Bowl. You're invited to help support the Sangha, to meet our expenses for renting this beautiful space and keeping us in the ether. And it also helps pay for our newsletter. And so yeah, give what you can. And I think that's the only announcements I have. Anybody else?
Okay.
The next board meeting we're having, if you'd like to come, is the 13th of February at 12:30 after GBO.
Next week, our teacher is David Rico, a psychologist, teacher, and writer in Santa Barbara and San Francisco, who emphasizes Jungian transpersonal and spiritual perspectives in his work. He is the author of How to Be an Adult in Relationships.
So he'll be here in person.
He'll be in person. Okay, cool. Oh, fun. All right. Any other announcements online or in the room? Pamela, would you like to offer a dedication of merit, or would you like us to use the one that we use?
I'm happy to offer something, just for variety. Yeah, so for those in the room and for those online, taking a moment to maybe let your eyes close and bring your attention inward. And noticing anything that may have been touched, stirred, moved in you from our gathering together today, in words and in silence. And then offering up any inspiration, any goodness, any sense of care or kindness or support or aliveness that you may have felt or you may be feeling. And imagining that you could open your hands and open your heart and send it out, sharing any benefit, any merit, anything helpful or useful from our time together, offering it up to the many, many beings, known and unknown, seen and unseen, all across our wide, aching world. By the power and truth of our practice together, may we, together with all beings, be free from suffering, and may we all awaken to the mysterious and mundane beauty of the world and be free. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Krisha.
Thanks,
George.
Pam.
Bye, everybody. Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Bye.
Take care of yourself through the holidays.
You too.
See you next year sometime.
Good luck with the novel.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.